Bismillah wa salatu salam ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. I mean, most of you probably know about him vaguely. I knew about him vaguely, and I was like, I started reading about him. I heard a talk by Sheikh Umar Fallata and a few other talks, and I was like, wow, there's like a lot more that I want to know about him. And there's a lot of question marks about there's a lot of fitting in that time, so it's hard to like get everything under grasp. And there's going to be a lot of names and a lot of dates. So I mean, I've tried to simplify it and keep it all like with diagrams, not diagrams, but with like timeline type of thing, so that it's easy for you to view and visualize it, inshallah. So without further ado, let's get started. I've organized the talk. Now all the messages are coming. I've organized the talk into different chapters. I've got the introduction. I'm going to talk a bit briefly about like his lineage, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf's lineage and his background and his growing up. And then I'm going to backtrack a bit, talk about the Umayyads because it ties in a lot to the Khalifa al-Umayyah. Then a few of the stories that he had with prominent people like Abdullah ibn Zubayr and Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma and Sa'id ibn Jubayr, Tabi'een. And then I'm going to talk about his death and how the people of Ahl Sunnah see him, inshallah. So, intro, he was born in the year 41 Hijri, which is known as Aam al-Jama'ah, which was the year that Hassan radiallahu anh stepped down from the Khalifa and gave it to Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. And his lineage from his mother's side, his lineage goes and joins with Mudar, I think, with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam before going up to Adnan. There's about 4 people that he connects with in the lineage. His mother's grandfather was Urwa ibn Mas'ud al-Thaqafi radiallahu anh, who was the companion who was from the seniors and from the notables of the people of Ta'if. And when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to give da'wah in Ta'if, then they all stoned him, as you know the story. And except for Urwa ibn Mas'ud, who went and followed the Prophet ﷺ and accepted Islam. And then he went back. He went asked the Prophet if he can go back to give da'wah to the people of Ta'if. And he said that, they're going to kill you. He said, no, that, they hold me in a high position. And if they kill me, then, it's shaheed. And there's a story behind that, but we won't go into it. In any case, they killed him. So that's his mother's grandfather. In Ta'if, he grew up studying Quran and studying hadith and studying eloquence. And he became prominent and well known. He started to teach it as well over there. And he spent the years growing up there. And he's even the one who, the tashkil in the Mus'haf, the harakat, he's the one who introduced that into the Mus'haf. So he was well known and he became famous for loving the Quran and for memorizing the Quran and having a very strong memory of the Quran. Then as he grew up older, then he wasn't satisfied with his situation there in Ta'if. And he had some political ambition. He wanted to join the army or, raise up in the ranks. And also it's mentioned that Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anhu was the governor of Ta'if and the surrounding areas of Mecca and so on. And some of the companions of Abdullah ibn Zubayr were quite harsh over Ta'if. And so Hajjaj ibn Yusuf really didn't like that. And he hated being under the rulership of Abdullah ibn Zubayr. It's been mentioned that was the case, and so he tried to. So he eventually left Ta'if and he joined the police in Sham under the Umayyad rulers. And in Sham he started to raise up the ranks. And there's stories about how he raised up the ranks and the person who raised him up and started, because he used to have ideas of how to improve the army. The army at that time, the police force was in quite a lot of disarray, and it was very poorly motivated. And so his command and his ideas helped to refurbish and renovate the army and get its motivation up, and he had a tremendous effort there. And summary of some of his transgressions is he was what's called a Nasibi, meaning that he hated Ali radiallahu anhu. So it's the opposite of a Shi'i basically. And it's mentioned, some mention that he's a Khariji. And not because he's a Kharij, not in terms of that he went against the rulers, but in terms of he used to kill people with the slightest reason for killing them, or even not even a reason to kill them, the slightest doubt, he would kill people, and he was known to be a butcher. And it's mentioned that he killed over 120,000 people during his reign. 80,000, he imprisoned 80,000 people, of which 30,000 were women. It's mentioned there's a story that where he passed by a prison and there were people in there, packed in there, and they were all screaming and crying. And when he heard them, he said, "Ikhsa'u fiha wa la tukallimun," from the ayah of the Quran. And for that reason, some of the scholars, they made takfir of him. We'll come to that in the last slide, inshallah. طيب, summary of the Umayyad dynasty at the time. So in the year 41 Hijri, that was the Am al-Jama'a when Hassan radiallahu an, so there was the fitna in that time, in the time of Ali radiallahu an. Hassan, after the death of Ali, Hassan took over the Khilafah, and Muawiyah also took over the Khilafah in Sham. And then Hassan tanazal, he stepped down and he gave the Khilafah over to Muawiyah. So the Muslim empire became united under Muawiyah radiallahu an. And Muawiyah radiallahu an, side point, is obviously he's a companion, and there's a lot of Shia who insult him and they compare him, for example, to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. But Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is nowhere to be compared to a Sahabi. Nowhere at all to be compared to a Sahabi. And Muawiyah has great juhud. And the Prophet ﷺ witnessed for him that he's from those who go to Jannah. Then Muawiyah ruled for about almost 20 years, and he was succeeded by his son Yazid al-Awwal, Yazid ibn Muawiyah. And there's another whole story over here about how the succession came to Yazid. And initially, Muawiyah radiallahu anh, he had placed the Khilafah after him in the hands of 6 people. He said, choose from 6 people. And one of those people was Abdullah ibn Zubayr, one of them was Ibn Umar, and one of them was Hassan radiallahu anh. And so at some point when Hassan died during the Khilafah of Muawiyah, then Muawiyah changed it to Yazid, and he had his reasons for that. But Abdullah ibn Zubayr and Abdullah ibn Umar, they disagreed with him, and another of the companions, they also disagreed with him on that. And so when Muawiyah died, then Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he sought the Khilafah, and he took hold of the Khilafah in Mecca and Medina, whereas the rest of the Muslim Empire generally accepted Yazid as the Khalifa. In the year 61 Hijri, in Karbala, so that's when the event of Karbala happened, when Hussein radiallahu anh was killed. So there's years of turmoil, yeah? Years 60 to 64, a lot of turmoil happened in those years. So Karbala happened in the year 61 Hijri, Hussein radiallahu anh was killed. In the year 63, Medina was initially with Yazid, and then they switched over to accepting Abdullah ibn Zubayr as a Khalifa. And so at that point, Yazid sent an army over to Mecca and besieged Mecca. In the year 64 Hijri, Yazid died, and Muawiyah al-Awwal, Muawiyah ibn Yazid, he took over the Khilafah, but he stayed for 3 months, and he stepped down, and he left the Khilafah for Abdullah ibn Zubayr radiallahu anh. So Abdullah ibn Zubayr, then he had the Khilafah all for himself, and so all of the Muslim Empire accepted him as the Khalifa, except for in Sham, where the Umayyad, the people of the Umayyun, their tribe and their family, and the people of Sham, they didn't accept him. And so in his place, they chose Marwan ibn al-Hakam, who was from those people who had been kicked out of Medina. I don't remember the reason for that. Then Marwan ibn al-Hakam, he died shortly afterwards, and he was succeeded by Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. And Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, he took the Khilafah in Sham, and he consolidated it in Sham, while Abdullah ibn Zubayr still had the rest of the Muslim Empire. Then Mukhtar, that at the same time there was other fitan that were happening. So this guy named Mukhtar from the Shia, he was they were causing complaints about the death of Hussein, and there was a lot of tribulation, a lot of fighting. So they rebelled over there in Karbala, in that region, and so Abdul Malik had to fight them and put them down. But before that, because the area was still, the Kufa or Iraq was still held by Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr sent his brother Mus'ab ibn Zubayr in the year 71 Hijri, and he defeated the Mukhtar and the Shia over there. That was followed by, in the year 71 Hijri, Abdul Malik sent an army over, or he went with the army, and he defeated Mus'ab ibn Zubayr, and he killed Mus'ab ibn Zubayr and sent his head to Abdullah ibn Zubayr. In the year 72 Hijri, so now at this point Hajjaj has been raised up in the ranks so much that he's been made a general of an army, and then Abdul Malik sends him as a general to besiege Mecca and besiege Abdullah ibn Zubayr in Mecca. Mecca was besieged for just over 5 months, 5.5 months, and while they were besieging it, while Hajjaj was besieging it, he used these mangonels to throw rocks and other types of things into Mecca from outside. And one of those rocks went and it damaged the Kaaba and broke the Kaaba. And there's a whole story again about, there can be a whole other Spark session on the story of the Kaaba and how the Kaaba was destroyed and rebuilt and then rebuilt again after that. When Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he was killed by a fragment that came in and killed him. So that's only when they killed him were they able to overcome Mecca, and Hajjaj was able to take over the rulership. And when he died, the people of Hajjaj, they made takbir. And so one of the Sahaba, or one of the companions, one of the Tabi'in, he mentioned that the takbir when he was born was better than the takbir when he died. And Abdullah ibn Zubayr, when he was born, he was the first born of the Muhajirin in Quba in Medina, when after the Hijrah. So he was born in the first year of the Hijrah. And when he was born, the Jews had said that we have cast a spell over the Muhajirin so that they won't be able to have children. So when he was born, the Muhajirun and Ansar were extremely happy, and they all made takbir. It was a moment of exhilaration and honor for the Muslims. And so when he died, there was also takbir. So he died, he was born to takbir, and he was killed with takbir. But the takbir of those who killed him were out of happiness of killing him. And he was 72 years old at the time. Then Hajjaj got him crucified and put him on the entrance to Medina. The exit of Mecca on the path to Medina. So the people of Quraysh, they started to walk past him, and there's a hadith about this in Sahih Muslim, where they would walk past him until Ibn Umar walked past him, and he spoke to him as if he was still alive, and he said, "Ya Aba Khubayb, أما والله لقد كنت أنهاك عن هذا أما والله لقد كنت أنهاك عن هذا," to the end of the hadith. And then he said, I used to prohibit you from this, because Abdullah ibn Umar at the time, he eventually to avoid the fitna, he decided to go with Yazid and accept Yazid as the ruler, and accept Abdul Malik after that as the ruler. And he was from those who wanted to avoid the fitna and stay away from the fitna, the fighting between the Muslims. And that was his ijtihad, and Abdullah ibn Zubayr had his own ijtihad. So both of them are Sahaba, great Sahabiyun, and that was both the ijtihad. And so Ibn Umar, he made this statement to him, and he also said, he praised Abdullah ibn Zubayr, he praised him for his I didn't know anyone who used to pray more than you, or fast more than you, or take care or connect the ties of kinship more than you. He praised him a lot. So when that reached Hajjaj, and there's the braveness of Abdullah ibn Umar, he didn't care about Hajjaj hearing. He knew Hajjaj would hear it, and he said it over there. So Ibn Umar, so when the news reached Hajjaj, he said he took him down, and it's mentioned that he feared that when the people heard that from Abdullah ibn Umar, the great companion, then the people might go against him. So he took his body down and he ordered it to be thrown into the graves of the Jews. At the time, there were graves of the Jews around Mecca or near Mecca, and that's either because when people used to come, the Jews used to come for trade and visit Mecca, or some Jews who settled in Mecca at the time. So there was a Jewish graveyard, and he ordered his body to be thrown there. Later on, his mother Asma radiallahu anha ordered for his body to be brought and washed and buried. Then Hajjaj called for Asma. He called Asma, the mother of Zubayr, of Abdullah ibn Zubayr, to come to him. And Asma, as you know, is the daughter of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. She was the one who aided the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was doing the migration. She was known as Dhatul Nitaqain because she had two straps or bands that she'd wrap around her her waist or to wrap her clothes up. In the time they used to have, the women used to wear this nitaq, which is something that used to use to wrap the clothes when they're doing work, so that their clothes wouldn't get soiled or damaged or anything. And so they normally would have one, but Asma had two. So she was known, the Prophet ﷺ called her Dhatun Nitaqain. She had two of them. And because she used to use one of them to carry the food for the Prophet ﷺ and her father Abu Bakr in the cave when they were doing the hijrah. So Asma at the time she was 100 years old, and Hajjaj went and called for her to come to him. So she said, I won't go to you. And so he said, you will come to me, or I will send you someone who will grab you by your hair and drag you to me. So she said, Wallahi, I won't come to you, even if you send someone to come and drag me. So in the end, Hajjaj came to her, and he said, have you seen what I did to the enemy of Allah, meaning Abdullah ibn Zubayr? So she said, I see that you have ruined his dunya, and he has ruined your akhirah. And then she mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that in Thaqif they'll come from Thaqif, meaning Ta'if, from the tribe of Thaqif. There will come a liar and a butcher, And so the liar was Al-Mukhtar ibn Abi Ubaid al-Thaqafi, who claimed to be a prophet, and that was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And as for the liar, and as for the butcher, then I don't see فَلَا يَخَالُكَ إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ, and I don't see that it's anyone except for you. And then Hajjaj left, and he didn't respond to her. So then Abdullah ibn Umar, in the same year, 73 Hijri, he was placed by Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. He was placed as the leader of Hajj. So he used to go and lead the people of Hajj, and Hajjaj was jealous of that. So in a crowded area, he took a poisoned thorn, and he went and he pricked Abdullah ibn Umar with that. And when Ibn Umar became sick, and he was on his deathbed, then Hajjaj came to visit him and to, Ya'uduh. So he visited him. He said, if only we find whoever did this thing, we will so and so. Abdullah ibn Umar said, no. He said, it was you who did it. It was you who did it. And there was whatever other conversation that happened at that point. So Abdullah ibn Umar was 10 years older than Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who was born 10 years before the Hijrah. Then moving on to Sa'id ibn Jubayr. Now there's a long story here. Again, that can be a whole lightning talk. Oh, sorry, bad word. Like a whole Spark session by itself. But Sa'id, Sa'id ibn Jubayr, he was from the Tabi'een, from the students of Abdullah ibn Abbas and others, from the great Tabi'een, rahimahullah. And in his time, there was basically there was some fitan that occurred with him and with a guy named Ibn Ash'ath and Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. And so Hajjaj was on the hunt for Sa'id ibn Jubayr and others other than him. So Sa'id ibn Jubayr was eventually brought to Al-Hajjaj. And Hajjaj at the time was the leader of Iraq. Because later on he was placed as leader of Iraq, and we're going to see in the slide, inshallah. So he was brought to a city called Wasit, which Hajjaj himself had built. And that city, Wasit in Iraq, is actually the city where the book Aqidat al-Wasitiyya gets its name from. And that whole story, again, there were many miracles that happened on that journey, and it's a long story. And what happened between the conversation that happened between Hajjaj and Sa'id, there's no time to go into that either. Eventually, it led to Hajjaj ordering for a mat, or what's called a nat' or a nit', to be brought out, which was the mat that they used to use, so that the blood of those who they executed would not spill around the whole court. So he ordered for the mat to be brought, and he said, "Uqtuluh, kill him." So Sa'id ibn Jubayr, he said, "Wajjahtu wajhi lilladhi fatara samawati al-arda hanifa wa ma ana mushrikeen," or the ayah. And he was facing the Qibla. So then Hajjaj said, turn him away from the Qibla. So then Sa'id responded, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. So which way you turn, then you're facing, towards Allah. So then Hajjaj said, throw him on his face. on the earth. كبوه على وجهه. And so then Sa'id recited, منها خلقناكم وفيها نعيدكم ومنها نخرجكم تارة أخرى. The ayah from that we brought you forth from it and we'll return you back to it. In the earth. And then Hajjaj said, اذبحوه, slaughter him. And so Sa'id ibn Jubayr made the shahada. He said his shahada and made dua against Hajjaj. And when he made dua, he said, Allahumma la tusallithu ala ahadin yaqtulhu ba'di. He made dua that that Allah would not allow him to kill anyone after him. And it's mentioned that Hajjaj lived for 15 nights after that before dying, and he became sick. And he couldn't eat, or the food would fall through his stomach. And so he called for a doctor, and the doctor placed a piece of rotting meat on a string, tied it to a string, and lowered it down his throat into his stomach. And when it came forth, one narration I mentioned that it came out with worms, another narration mentioned blood. So it came out, and so he knew at that point that he wasn't going to survive. And he used to have haunting dreams. He used to say, whenever I try and go to sleep, what is it with Sa'id ibn Jubayr? Every time I go to sleep, he grabs me by my leg, and he pulls me by my leg. And it's mentioned that he would feel extremely cold, so much so that he would have a fireplace next to him while he was trying to sleep, and he would be right next to it, and it would be a blazing fire, but he would still feel freezing cold, so much so that his clothes would burn from the fire, and he would still feel cold. And then he passed away in Ramadan or Shawwal of the year 95 Hijri, and his grave, he ordered for his grave to be hidden so that people couldn't damage it or desecrate it. Some of the gaps that just summarizing those years in the timeline. So in the year 75 Hijri, so again, the year 73 was when Abdullah ibn Zubayr was killed and Abdullah ibn Umar was assassinated. The year 75 Hijri, Hajjaj was, because the people of Hijaz, meaning Mecca and Medina, they complained about the cruelty of Hajjaj. And so Abdul Malik ibn Marwan came to Medina, and he removed Hajjaj from that area and he put him in over Iraq until he died. So he ruled over Iraq for 20 years. In the year 76 to 78 Hijri, Hajjaj was busy fighting the Khawarij in the area. In the year 80 Hijri was the fitna of Ibn al-Ash'ath, which is a whole story in and of itself. In the year 83 Hijri, there was a battle of Deir or Dir al-Jamajim, where most of the people of Ibn Ash'ath were killed, except for Ibn Ash'ath himself. He fled, and in the year 85 Hijri, Ibn Ash'ath committed suicide. From what I could understand, I'm not 100% sure about the suicide part, but what I understood was that he jumped off a building and was killed. And so then the people who he was seeking refuge with, who were fighting against the Muslims at the time, they cut off his head and they sent it back to Hajjaj in the 85 Hijri. In the year 86 Hijri, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, the Khalifa, who was now at that point accepted, after the death of Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Abdul Malik ibn Marwan was accepted as the Khalifa of the whole Muslim empire, so became united again under him. And so in the year 86 Hijri, Abdul Malik died, and he was succeeded by his son Al-Walid ibn Abdul Malik. Al-Walid, he liked Hajjaj, and he brought Hajjaj even closer to him, even though his brother, who was Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik, and his cousin, who was none other than Abdul Aziz, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah. In the year 95 Hijri, Hajjaj died, and in the year 96 Hijri, Walid died. Walid was the Khalifa. He died, and he was succeeded by Sulaiman, his brother, Sulaiman ibn Abdul Malik. And in the year 3 years later, he died in the year 99 Hijri, and he was succeeded by Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, who removed any remainders of what existed from the time of Hajjaj. And anyone who was loyal to Hajjaj and who had worked for him, he removed them from office. He didn't want anything to do with them or them to have any authority anymore in the army or in governorship. To end with the summary of the position of Ahlul Sunnah Jama'ah. So on Hajjaj's deathbed, when he was dying, he made a dua. He said, "Oh Allah, the people have gathered against that I am not going that I'm going to the fire, or that I'm not going to Jannah, so forgive me." Or sorry, the people have gathered that you won't forgive me, so forgive me. And so although some of the scholars mentioned that he's a kafir because of his statement, "Ikhsa'u fiha wa la tukallimun," which is the statement that Allah says to the people of Jahannam when they cry out for help. So some scholars made takfir of him for that, because they said that he's placing himself in the station of Allah. Others said that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that, in that his affair remains with Allah, even though his evil outweighs his good. And the Dhahabi, there's a quote from Dhahabi over here in Sir A'lam al-Nubala, where he mentions that he was known for his love of the Quran, and he's the one who brought the tashkil into the Quran. But his dhunub and his tyrannical behavior and killing of numerous people, and killing of the Sahaba, and destroying of the Kaaba, and many other evils to add to that, then those outweigh his good. And in the end, the summary is that his affair is with Allah. So we don't say that he is from Ahlul Jannah or from Ahlul Nar. Allahu A'lam. Those are my references. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.